pregnant wolf, gravely injured and abandoned in the freezing winter, stumbles upon a man living alone in the wilderness. Surprisingly, instead of attacking or fleeing, the wolf shows an unexplainable trust in him. What happens next will leave you in disbelief. For continuing the story, tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. The winter of 2024 settled over British Columbia's remote wilderness like a heavy white blanket. Among the snow-laden pines and frozen lakes, Ethan Thorne's cabin stood as a solitary outpost of humanity. At 58, Ethan had traded his successful veterinary practice in Vancouver for this simpler life, choosing solitude over the city's constant buzz. His cabin, crafted from local timber and stone, sat nestled against the backdrop of the coast mountains. Solar panels and a small wind turbine provided modest electricity, while a robust wood stove kept the bitter cold at bay. It wasn't luxurious, but it suited Ethan perfectly. After losing his wife Emily to cancer 3 years prior, the wilderness had become his healing sanctuary. Every morning he'd wake before dawn, kindle the fire, and watch the sun paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. His routine was simple but purposeful, checking his weather equipment, maintaining his small greenhouse where he grew winter vegetables, and tending to the needs of his property. The nearest town was 40 miles away, a journey he made monthly for supplies and to check in with the local ranger station. Ethan's medical skills hadn't gone entirely unused in his new life. He'd become known among the local rangers as someone who could help with injured wildlife. His cabin's basement had been converted into a small medical station, complete with basic veterinary supplies and equipment he'd brought from his practice. Over the past 2 years, he'd treated everything from injured eagles to orphaned deer fawns, but it was his connection to wolves that ran deepest. During his practice years, Ethan had specialized in large predators, spending considerable time studying wolf behavior and social structures. He'd written several papers on wolf rehabilitation and had even helped establish protocols for treating injured wolves in the wild. The walls of his cabin were adorned with photographs and sketches of wolves he'd encountered throughout his career. Emily had always supported his passion, even when it meant long hours away from home or dangerous conditions in the field. "You speak their language," she'd say, watching him work with injured animals. "They trust you because you respect them." Her words still echoed in his mind during quiet evenings when the wolf packs would howl in the distance. That particular winter had started earlier and harder than usual. By mid-November, temperatures had plunged well below freezing, and the snow had piled up to unprecedented levels. Ethan noticed changes in wildlife behavior, deer moving to lower elevations, birds struggling to find food, and predators growing bolder in their hunt for sustenance. His satellite phone, his main connection to the outside world, brought regular updates from the ranger station about wildlife struggling with the harsh conditions. Several wolf packs had been forced to alter their traditional hunting grounds, leading to increased competition for the dwindling prey population. One evening, as Ethan sat at his desk updating his wildlife observation journal, a familiar sound caught his attention: the distant howl of a wolf. But this wasn't the typical hunting call or pack communication he had grown accustomed to hearing. There was something different in this vocalization, something that made his experienced ears perk up. It carried a note of distress that concerned him. Looking at his weather station readings, he noted the temperature had dropped to -20 degrees Celsius. The wind chill made it feel even colder. Another howl echoed through the darkness, closer this time, and Ethan's instincts told him something was wrong. After 30 years of working with wolves, he'd learned to trust those instincts. He moved to his window, scanning the tree line with his high-powered flashlight. The beam cut through the swirling snow, creating eerie shadows among the trees. For a moment, he caught a glimpse of movement, a dark shape moving awkwardly through the deep snow. Ethan knew the risks of investigating wildlife at night, especially in such severe weather conditions. But something about that howl, combined with his years of experience, compelled him to act. He began gathering his emergency medical kit, heavy winter gear, and tracking equipment. As he prepared to venture out into the bitter night, Emily's voice seemed to whisper in his mind, "They trust you because you respect them." Little did Ethan know, but his decision to investigate that distress call would lead to one of the most extraordinary experiences of his life, testing not only his medical skills, but also his understanding of the deep connection between humans and wild animals. The beam of Ethan's flashlight cut through the darkness as he made his way through knee-deep snow. The temperature had dropped another 2 degrees since he'd left the cabin, and his breath crystallized instantly in the frigid air. Following the direction of the howls, he moved cautiously through the trees, his experienced eyes scanning for signs of movement. After 20 minutes of careful tracking, he found the first of her dense drops of blood in the snow, dark against the white powder. The trail led him to a small clearing, and what he saw there made him catch his breath. A large female wolf lay partially sheltered under a fallen pine, her dark gray coat dusted with snow. Even from a distance, Ethan could see she was severely malnourished, her normally robust frame gaunt and weak. But what struck him most was her swollen belly. She was pregnant, and from the size of her abdomen, fairly far along. As he approached, the wolf raised her head weakly, showing none of the typical aggression he'd expect from a wild wolf. Their eyes met, and Ethan saw something he'd seen countless times in his career, a desperate animal recognizing a potential ally. The wolf's right hind leg was caught in an illegal trap, the rusty metal teeth biting deep into her flesh. "Easy there, girl," Ethan spoke softly, using the calm, steady voice that had served him well with injured animals. "I'm here to help." He moved slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. The wolf watched him intently, but didn't growl or show signs of fear. As he got closer, he could see the extent of her condition. Besides the trapped leg, she showed signs of severe dehydration and starvation. Her pack must have moved on without her, following the migrating deer herds, leaving her to fend for herself. The trap was an old model banned years ago due to its cruelty. Ethan felt a surge of anger at whoever had left it here, but pushed the emotion aside to focus on the task at hand. He needed to free her leg without causing further injury, and he needed to do it quickly in this dangerous cold. From his medical kit, he prepared a mild sedative, just enough to keep her calm while he worked. To his surprise, she allowed him to approach close enough to administer the injection. As the medication took effect, her eyes remained fixed on him, filled with what he could only describe as trust. "What happened to your pack?" he murmured as he worked to disengage the trap. "You should have a whole family looking after you in this condition." The trap finally released its grip, revealing a deep wound that would need immediate attention. The wolf had lost blood, and in these temperatures, hypothermia was a real concern. Ethan knew he faced a crucial decision, one that went against conventional wildlife management protocols. He couldn't leave her here. In her weakened state, pregnant and injured, she wouldn't survive the night. But taking a wild wolf back to his cabin, especially one in such a vulnerable condition, carried its own risks. Yet as he looked into those intelligent eyes, he knew he had no choice. "Well, girl," he said, already shrugging off his outer coat to wrap around her, "I hope you're ready for some human hospitality, because you're about to become my house guest." With extreme care, he lifted her. She was dangerously light for her body, confirming his fears about her malnourished state. The wolf remained surprisingly calm as he carried her through the snow, her body trembling from cold and shock. The trip back to the cabin seemed to take hours, though it couldn't have been more than 30 minutes. By the time Ethan pushed through his door, his arms were burning from the effort, and sweat had frozen on his face despite the bitter cold. As he laid her gently on the thick rug near his wood stove, the wolf's eyes met his again. In that moment, Ethan felt the weight of the responsibility he'd just taken on. This wasn't just about treating an injured leg anymore. This was about saving not only this wolf, but her unborn pups as well. He knew the next few hours would be critical. What he didn't know was that this night would mark the beginning of an extraordinary journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about wolves, about healing, and about the mysterious bonds that can form between humans and wild creatures. The first week with his wild patient tested every bit of Ethan's veterinary experience. He named her Aurora, after the full moon that had illuminated the night he found her. The initial treatment of her leg wound took hours cleaning, disinfecting, and carefully stitching the deep gashes left by the trap. Throughout the procedure, Aurora remained eerily calm, as if understanding his intentions. "You're either the most trusting wolf I've ever met," Ethan told her as he finished bandaging her leg, "or you're too weak to put up a fight, Unma. Either way, we're in this together now." He converted his basement medical station into a recovery room, creating a comfortable den-like space with blankets and straw. The temperature could be better controlled there, and it provided the darkness and quiet that would help reduce her stress. However, Aurora had other ideas. Every time Ethan carried her downstairs, she would somehow manage to drag herself back up to the main floor, settling stubbornly by the wood stove. After the third attempt, Ethan gave up. "All right, you win, but we're doing this properly." He rearranged his living room, creating a protected space behind his old leather armchair, where Aurora could feel secure while still keeping warm by the fire. The pregnancy complicated everything. Ethan's ultrasound equipment confirmed his initial estimate. Aurora was carrying 5 pups and was approximately 7 weeks along. Her malnourished state posed a serious risk to both her and her unborn litter. He began a careful feeding program, starting with small amounts of nutrient-rich broth before gradually introducing solid food. "Small steps," he explained to Aurora, who watched him prepare her meals with intelligent eyes. "Too much too fast could shock your system." As the days passed, Aurora's trust in Ethan grew. She allowed him to check her wounds, change her bandages, and even examine her growing belly without protest. More surprisingly, she began responding to his voice, turning her head when he spoke and following his movements around the cabin with apparent interest. Ethan documented everything meticulously, knowing this situation was unprecedented. He contacted Dr. Rachel Turner, a colleague from his Vancouver days who specialized in wolf behavior. "This is extraordinary, Ethan," Rachel said during one of their satellite phone calls. "A wild wolf, especially a pregnant one, should be showing far more defensive behavior. Are you sure she wasn't previously habituated to humans?" "No tags, no signs of previous human contact," Ethan replied, watching Aurora doze by the fire. "And her initial blood work showed no traces of the vaccines we typically use in wolf management programs." "She's completely wild, Rachel. She's just different." By the 3rd week, Aurora's physical recovery was progressing well. The wound on her leg was healing cleanly, and her strength was returning thanks to the careful diet Ethan had designed. Her belly continued to grow, and regular ultrasounds showed the pups developing normally. But it was the behavioral changes that fascinated Ethan most. Aurora began following him around the cabin during his daily routine. When he sat at his desk to update his journals, she would lie nearby, watching him write. At night, she would position herself between his bed and the door, as if standing guard. She even started responding to her name, though Ethan knew better than to anthropomorphize this behavior too much. "You're still a wild animal," he reminded her one evening as she rested her head on his knee while he read. "Don't let this temporary arrangement fool you." The real challenges began in the 4th week. As Aurora's strength returned, so did her wild instincts. She became restless, pacing the cabin and scratching at the door. Her appetite increased dramatically, and she began hiding food around the cabin, a natural behavior for a pregnant wolf preparing for whelping. Ethan knew he needed to prepare for the birth. Wolf pups would need specialized care, and there was the question of what to do once they arrived. Keeping them all indefinitely wasn't an option. The pups needed to grow up wild if they were to have any chance of survival in nature. He converted his storage room into a whelping den, designing it to mimic a natural wolf den as closely as possible. Aurora took to it immediately, spending hours arranging the bedding to her satisfaction, but she still insisted on spending her evenings by the wood stove, maintaining what had become their shared routine. As the expected delivery date approached, Ethan faced another dilemma. Word of Aurora's presence had spread through the wildlife management community, drawing both interest and concern. Some officials argued that she should be transferred to a wildlife facility better equipped for wolf rehabilitation. Others worried about the precedent this situation might set. "You can't keep her forever, Ethan," Rachel reminded him during one of their calls. "Eventually, you'll have to make some hard decisions." He knew she was right, but watching Aurora trust him so completely, seeing her prepare for her pups with such determination made the prospect of separating from her increasingly difficult. She had become more than just a patient. She was a daily reminder of the deep connection possible between humans and wild creatures. One stormy evening, as wind howled around the cabin, Aurora became particularly agitated. Her pacing increased, and she started making soft whining sounds Ethan hadn't heard before. When she refused her evening meal, a first since she'd begun recovering, Ethan knew the time had come. "Ready to be a mother?" he asked her softly, watching her move restlessly between the whelping den and his side. "Don't worry, girl, I'm not going anywhere." As the night deepened and the storm raged outside, Ethan prepared for what would be one of the most extraordinary experiences of his career, helping a wild wolf bring new life into the world, while knowing that each successful birth would bring him closer to the inevitable moment of letting go. The birth of Aurora's pups began just after midnight. Ethan had assisted in countless animal births during his career, but this was different. A wild wolf choosing to deliver her pups in the presence of a human was unprecedented, and he knew he was witnessing something extraordinary. Aurora paced between the whelping den and Ethan positioned nearby, occasionally pressing her head against his leg as contractions intensified. Her trust in him seemed absolute now, even in this most vulnerable moment. "You're doing great, girl," he murmured, monitoring her progress carefully, just like nature intended. The first pup arrived at 2:17 a.m., a tiny dark bundle that Aurora immediately began cleaning with gentle dedication. Ethan watched in amazement as she expertly severed the umbilical cord and stimulated the pup's first breath. The tiny wolf gave a weak cry, and Aurora looked up at Ethan as if sharing her triumph. Over the next 4 hours, 4 more pups joined their sibling. Each delivery went smoothly, with Ethan intervening only once when the 4th pup needed slight assistance. By dawn, Aurora lay exhausted but content, nursing 5 healthy pups, 3 males and 2 females. But nature had one more surprise in store. As Ethan was recording the details of each pup's birth in his journal, Aurora became restless again. Her behavior indicated another contraction was coming. Concerned, he moved closer to examine her. "What's wrong, girl?" There were only 5 in the ultrasound. To his astonishment, a 6th pup emerged, significantly smaller than its siblings, but alive and fighting. This tiny female, with unique white markings on her chest, would have been hidden behind her larger siblings during the ultrasound scans. However, the runt was struggling to reach Aurora's milk, pushed aside by her stronger siblings. Ethan knew the next few hours would be critical for her survival. Drawing on his years of experience, he began supplementary feeding with a special formula he'd prepared for emergencies. Aurora watched intently as he fed her smallest pup, and to his surprise began nudging the tiny wolf toward him whenever it needed feeding. It was as if she understood that her runt needed extra help and was actively seeking his assistance. "Well, little one," Ethan said to the tiny pup as he fed her in the pale morning light, "you're definitely a fighter." The storm outside had intensified, now a full blizzard that transformed the landscape into a white void. The temperature had plunged to dangerous levels, and Ethan realized that had Aurora given birth in the wild, these pups, especially the runt, would have faced slim chances of survival. As morning progressed, Aurora's behavior suddenly changed. She became agitated, her ears pricked forward, listening intently. Ethan heard 2 wolves howling in the distance, much closer to the cabin than usual. The storm must have driven Aurora's original pack into this territory. Aurora stood, her protective instincts clearly warring with something else. She moved to the window, listening to the howls, then returned to her pups, whining softly. The conflict was clear, the pull of her pack versus the safety of her newborns. Ethan faced a crucial decision. The right thing to do, according to every wildlife management protocol, would be to facilitate Aurora's reunion with her pack. It would be the most natural outcome. But the pups were only hours old, and in this weather, moving them was impossible. Aurora made the decision for him. She returned to her pups, settled down, and began nursing them again, including the tiny runt. She had chosen to trust in the safety Ethan provided over the call of her pack. The howling gradually faded as the pack moved on, but the magnitude of what had just happened hung heavy in the cabin. A wild wolf had not only accepted human help, but had chosen it over her own kind for the safety of her pups. Ethan sat beside Aurora, gently stroking her head. "You're rewriting everything we thought we knew about wolf behavior." "Girl," he told her softly. Every single day, he looked at the 6 pups nursing contentedly, the tiny runt now secured between her larger siblings. In that moment, Ethan understood that this wasn't just about saving one wolf and her pups anymore. What was happening in this cabin could change our understanding of wolf behavior and human-wildlife relationships forever. The natural world had gifted him with an extraordinary trust, and with it came an enormous responsibility. These pups would need to learn to be wild wolves, even while accepting that humans could be allies rather than threats. It would be a delicate balance, and the next few months would prove crucial in achieving it. As the blizzard raged outside, Ethan began making notes for what would become one of the most remarkable wildlife studies ever documented. The story of a wolf who chose to bridge the ancient gap between wild and human worlds, starting with a moment of trust in a stormy winter night. The weeks following the births brought new challenges and revelations. Ethan named the runt Lily, though he maintained a strict policy of not naming the other pups to avoid too much domestication. Lily required constant attention, and Aurora seemed to understand and approve of this special care, often pushing the tiny pup toward Ethan when feeding times approached. Word of the extraordinary birth spread through the wildlife research community. Dr. Rachel Turner arrived from Vancouver to document this unprecedented situation, bringing specialized equipment to monitor the pups' development without disturbing them. "I've never seen anything like this, Ethan," Rachel admitted, watching Aurora calmly allow them to weigh and examine her pups. "She's maintaining all her wild instincts, teaching the pups, protecting them, but she's integrated you into their social structure. It's revolutionary." The pups grew rapidly, each developing distinct personalities. The largest male showed natural leadership qualities, while one of the females demonstrated remarkable problem-solving abilities. Lily, though remaining smaller than her siblings, proved to be the most curious about human interaction, mirroring her mother's unusual trust. By the time the pups were 4 weeks old, Ethan had established a careful routine that balanced human care with natural wolf development. Aurora began teaching her pups essential wolf behaviors, from proper grooming to the beginnings of pack hierarchy. She would take them on short excursions into the fenced area Ethan had created behind the cabin, demonstrating hunting techniques with small prey. What fascinated researchers most was how Aurora would bring her pups back to Ethan after these lessons, as if ensuring they understood he was part of their extended pack. She had created a unique hybrid of wild and human-adjacent behavior that challenged every established notion of wolf sociology. "She's teaching them that humans can be allies," Rachel observed during one of her weekly visits, "but she's not domesticating them. Look how she corrects them when they act too tame. She's maintaining their wild essence while building a bridge of trust." The transformation wasn't limited to the wolves. Ethan found himself changed by the experience as well. His detailed journals, filled with observations and insights, were already being hailed as groundbreaking by the scientific community. But more than that, he had discovered a new understanding of the delicate balance between helping wildlife and preserving their essential wildness. As spring approached, Aurora began taking her pups on longer excursions. She would lead them out in the morning, returning by sunset, each trip building their strength and survival skills. Lily, though still smaller, kept pace with her siblings, her determination making up for her size. Ethan observed these developments with mixed emotions, knowing what they signified. One evening, as Aurora led her family back to the cabin after a day of training, she paused at the tree line. The pup, now strong and capable, gathered around her. Ethan watched from the porch as Aurora looked between her growing pups in the cabin, and he understood she was preparing them, and him, for the inevitable. "You're right," he said softly when she approached him later that night, her eyes holding that intelligent gaze he'd come to know so well. "They need to be wild. That's always been the goal." Rachel helped him develop a transition plan that would give the wolf family the best chance of successful reintegration into the wild. They would gradually increase the length of their excursions while decreasing human contact, allowing the pups to develop the skills and independence they would need. But nature, as always, had its own timeline. One crisp spring morning, Ethan heard familiar howling in the distance. Aurora's original pack had returned to their traditional territory. This time when Aurora listened to their calls, her posture was different. Her pups, now strong and skilled, gathered around her with alert anticipation. Ethan knew it was time. The moment he had both dreaded and worked toward had arrived, bringing with it the bittersweet reality of successful wildlife rehabilitation. The day Aurora led her family into the wilderness for the last time was bright and clear. the kind of spring morning that promises new beginnings. Ethan watched from his porch as Aurora gathered her pups at the edge of the clearing. Each of them, even little Lily, had grown into a capable young wolf, ready for life in the wild. Aurora approached Ethan one final time, her pups waiting patiently at the tree line. She pressed her head against his hand, a gesture that had become familiar over their months together. In her eyes, Ethan saw not just trust, but also gratitude, a deep understanding between two beings who had shared something extraordinary. "Go on, girl," he whispered, fighting back emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. "You've done everything right. They're ready." As if understanding his words, Aurora turned and rejoined her pups. With one last look over her shoulder, she led them into the forest, their gray forms disappearing among the trees like shadows melting into dawn. Ethan stood watching long after they'd vanished from sight, the morning air carrying the distant sound of wolves calling to each other. The story might have ended there, a beautiful tale of rescue, rehabilitation, and release, but nature had one more surprise in store. A month after Aurora's departure, Ethan was awakened before dawn by familiar howling. Looking out his window, he saw a sight that took his breath away. Aurora stood at the edge of the clearing, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood members of her original pack, including a large male Ethan recognized as the alpha. Among them, playing and wrestling confidently, were all 6 pups, including Lily. Aurora had done the impossible. She had successfully integrated her pups into her original pack, proving that her trust in human help hadn't compromised their ability to be wild wolves. More remarkably, the pack seemed to have accepted the cabin and Ethan as non-threatening elements in their territory. Over the following months, Ethan documented regular visits from the pack. They never came too close, maintaining a healthy wild distance, but their presence sent a clear message. They had accepted this unique relationship between their kind and his. Word of this extraordinary development spread through the wildlife research community. Ethan Cabin became a site for groundbreaking research on wolf behavior and human-wildlife cooperation. The data gathered would help shape new approaches to wildlife rehabilitation and conservation. Lily, the tiny runt who had required so much extra care, grew into a strong young wolf with her mother's unusual intelligence. She seemed to remember Ethan, often standing at the edge of the clearing, watching him with the same thoughtful gaze as her mother. 1 year to the day after finding Aurora in the trap, Ethan received a special visit. Aurora appeared at dawn, this time with Lily Ollie and 2 new pups of her own. They stayed at the clearing's edge, the young pups watching curiously as their mother and older sister led them in what seemed like a deliberate introduction to the human who had helped ensure their family's survival. The experience transformed Ethan's understanding of wildlife rehabilitation. He had learned that successful conservation wasn't just about saving animals. It was about building trust, respecting wild nature, and recognizing that sometimes the boundary between wild and human worlds could be crossed without destroying what made each unique. Rachel Turner helped him publish his findings in several prestigious wildlife journals. The Aurora Protocol, as it became known, revolutionized approaches to wildlife rehabilitation, emphasizing the possibility of providing help while preserving wild instincts. What Aurora taught us, Ethan wrote in his final journal entry about the experience, is that wildness and trust aren't mutually exclusive. In helping her, we didn't tame her, we earned her trust while respecting her essential nature. Perhaps that's the key to all successful wildlife conservation, not to dominate or control, but to build bridges of understanding between our worlds. Ethan still lives in his cabin, continuing his work with injured wildlife. While he knows his experience with Aurora was unique, it changed forever how he approaches his role in helping wild animals. Each evening as the sun sets behind the mountains, he listens to the wolves howling in the distance, knowing that somewhere out there, Aurora's legacy continues through generations of wolves who know that humans can be more than just a threat. They can be allies in survival. As Ethan sits in his favorite chair by the wood stove on winter evenings, the spot where Aurora once lay still, seeming to hold her presence, he often reflects on how one act of kindness can ripple through time, changing not just lives but entire approaches to wildlife conservation. Visitors to the cabin frequently ask to hear the story, and Ethan always obliges, though he's careful to emphasize that Aurora's case was exceptional. "We can't expect every wild animal to show such trust," he tells them, But we can learn from what Aurora taught us about patience, respect, and the delicate balance between helping and preserving wildness. The cabin has become something of an informal education center. School groups visit during warmer months, learning about wildlife rehabilitation and conservation. Ethan shows them the photographs he took of Aurora and her pups, using their story to inspire a new generation's interest in wildlife protection. Sometimes, on particularly clear nights, visitors are treated to the sound of wolves howling in the distance. Ethan can usually identify Aurora's pack by their distinct calling patterns. The local rangers report that her pack is thriving, with several generations now roaming the territory. They've noted that this particular pack shows unusually little conflict with human settlements, maintaining a respectful distance while seeming to understand the boundaries between their worlds. Lily's offspring have been spotted too, identifiable by the same white chest markings she inherited from some distant ancestor. They seem to share that same unusual intelligence that characterized Aurora, suggesting that perhaps these traits run deeper than anyone previously understood. The scientific papers documenting Aurora's case have inspired new approaches to wildlife rehabilitation across the globe. Conservation centers have begun implementing programs that balance necessary human care with preservation of wild instincts, leading to higher success rates in releasing rehabilitated animals back into their natural habitats. Aurora's greatest gift, Ethan often says during his presentations, wasn't just the trust she showed in humans, but what she taught us about trusting in nature itself. When we approach wildlife with respect and understanding, we often find that the natural world has wisdom we never suspected. As he grows older, Ethan has begun training younger veterinarians in his methods, ensuring that Aurora's legacy will continue. Each new generation of wildlife rehabilitators learns the importance of patience, of respecting wild nature while offering help, and of understanding that sometimes the greatest kindness is knowing when to let go. The trap that once threatened Aurora's life still hangs on Ethan's wall, a reminder of both human cruelty and compassion. Next to it are photographs documenting her journey, from that first night of rescue to the last glimpse of her leading her family into the forest. They serve as powerful testimony to what can happen when humans choose to help rather than harm. On quiet evenings, Ethan still leaves his porch light on, casting a gentle glow across the clearing where Aurora first taught her pups about trust and survival. Sometimes, if he's particularly fortunate, he catches a glimpse of wolves at the forest's edge. Perhaps Aurora's descendants, carrying forward that remarkable legacy of trust and wild wisdom. Every act of kindness matters, Ethan tells his students, even if we can't always see the results. Aurora taught us that when we extend our help with respect and understanding, nature sometimes responds in ways we never imagined possible. And so the story continues, passed down through generations of both wolves and humans, a testament to the extraordinary bonds that can form when we open our hearts to the wild world while honoring its essential nature. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on the next amazing video. Share this story with those you care about so they too can feel the power of love and respect between humans and nature. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next inspiring story.